Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, grannies and gators. It is Thursday, August 15th, and I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I've been dragged through the ringer the last couple of weeks. If you've been, a lot of you guys you're here every night. You guys, must be kind of wondering already. It's just like boom, 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 boom every night. Just a bunch of craziness. It's been a ton of work. Last night or yesterday, there was three different shows and interviews, and then some design meetings, and yada yada. So at the end of the day, when I got up this morning, my head was pretty much a muddled mud puddle of everything that I've been absorbing and digesting and going through and sorting and fighting. And but yeah, it's isn't it wonderful? Isn't it the most exciting and interesting time to absolutely be alive? So tonight is a little bit uh, helter skelter, I guess. It's a plan B, C, D, or E, whatever. This is adapt, improvise, and overcome. When you're a daily podcaster, life just gets in the way, and you don't have a lot of room. Right? There's a process and a procedure that I go through to sort and sift through countless hours of stuff to get to the stuff that I think you guys might be interested in or might matter in the now. And so I got halfway through a couple of different things, and today was just trying to catch up day. So it's going to be a little bit more casual, a little bit more laid back. Last night's guest, Sean Newman, was interesting opportunity because for those of you guys that tuned in here, we did an hour here on this platform, and then we went over to his channel and recorded there, which got published this morning. And it was a very different conversation. It's interesting when you get two different podcasters that I think are pretty good. She's excellent. I think I'm okay. Together we come off pretty good, I think, in our discussion last night, but it was very, very different discussions. I also did a recording with Jim Ferguson over at Freedom Train International yesterday. So they've been doing their thing, what they do, and of course, I am making friends and interesting content and creation and feedback all over the metaverse. So I kind of got to run with that. You go with the momentum when you have it, and it's been nice to see, and thank you all, everybody that's out there. Like it says right beneath me here, your likes and your shares matter. They may matter now more than ever. So whatever platform you're tuning in from tonight, thank you. It is you guys. I do the grunt work. So you guys don't have to, but you guys do the heavy lifting and pushing it all around the world, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. And the feedback, it has been really awesome lately. So thank you for tuning in wherever you're tuning in from. This changes a little bit. I just got another week suspension on YouTube. Why? Because they are cracking down on the anti-jabbers again, which to me, that's kind of one of those radar red flags when I want to know what's coming next. It's pretty much, how are they going to abuse me on YouTube first? So that's kind of really the only reason I keep it there. But yeah, so we all know about the the next charade that is coming to us. So tonight, I'm going to give you guys the choice. You guys are going to decide which direction we're going to go. So I'm going to start with pulling up just the titles so you guys can kind of get an idea of what we're potentially looking at tonight. And then I'll wait for a few comments, probably the comments that I can see. I can see comments on Instagram. I can see comments on Rumble. I can see comments from X. And I can see comments from Facebook. Strangely enough, Facebook is still allowing me to stream. They're restricting my reach, but they're allowing me to stream. So we're live on Facebook, X, Instagram, Rumble, Wimkin. I can see comments on Wimkin. And we are also live on whatsupcanada.org and lgm.news. So the choices for tonight are the true origin of liberal funded systemic hate crimes in Canada. This was a documentary that I put together a couple of several years ago now, when I exposed a bunch of stuff that I discovered through court transcripts. Actually, a whistleblower, sent me some court transcripts, and man, was it a gold mine of the who's who and the bee's knees of who is paid by the government to label you guys as criminals and terrorists. So they've been making a lot of noise here lately. Blacklocks has uncovered a bunch of stuff. Karima Siad in Ottawa or Toronto, wherever she's based, I'm not sure, has uncovered a bunch of stuff. But interestingly enough, they still haven't hit the mother lode of what's behind driving this manufacturing system. These guys are paid to manufacture. It's like a factory for making fake crooks. They want to make sure that the government has an enemy. So we've got a choice. I'm going to let you guys decide here, and I'll watch for comments as to whether we're going to watch this, the Anti-Hate Network expose that nobody else has really gotten into yet, and you guys can laugh at me for a really bad production value. The quality was not as good in 2021 as it is today, but the information remains the same. Or do you guys want to watch Whitney Webb and Neil Oliver? And this was an interview that I've been trying to sift through for almost a week now. But there's so many nuggets in here, so much information. And Whitney Webb is one of those people that she can just hammer the points and the facts. She's like got an encyclopedia brain. So number A or B, throw it out there in the comments. A will be Neil Oliver and Whitney Webb, or plan B, the Anti-Hate Network, the crooks, the real crooks in Canada that have just gotten something like another $640,000 of your money. So I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to throw some comments out in here, and I'm going to take that minute or two, because there's a 30-second lag from my dashboard to when you guys comment. So this is why it's hard for some podcasters to see your comments when it's relevant in their show. They might be a bit ahead of you guys. So I'm going to kind of do a bit of a housekeeping, a couple of seconds of housekeeping here. So just because I have to do this every day, because we're still trying to get people to safe places of communication, and it's not always up long enough, or we get a lot of new viewers. But with things that are going to get worse as far as censorship and abuse and propaganda, we put a lot of work into making some safe places for us to regroup and reform and carry on as we do. So What's Up Canada is kind of a cornerstone for that. Every show that we do is on whatsupcanada.org, and it's also, I want to highlight this one because that's the easiest way to remember where to find the subscription box for the Substack, which is free, 100% free. If you want to help out for $6 a month, you can get a paid subscription there. And on here is where you also get access to our partners, that as the things get crazier, these partners are going to make more and more sense to everybody. And I want to take just a couple of seconds to switch to one of those particular partners, our Patriot Switch partner. Guys, what we do with these guys is the safest, most effective way to defund the cabal. This is what we actually do here. Is we don't just boycott them, we replace them permanently and forever with North American made non-toxic goods that are going to outperform anything you buy from any of the crony capitalists out there, all of these companies, these Unilevers, P&G, Johnson and Johnson, they are stealing from you, giving you garbage, getting your money so that they can continue to implement all of the insanity that they do. So that's something that I really encourage everybody to take a look at. On the top of the page, you can click the button and it'll ask you just a couple of questions. That's all it takes. Fill in these blanks. And a lady that is a part of the team, just like you and I, an average person, is going to connect with you and let you give you the grand tour and answer all of your questions, whatever they might be. And if she can't, we'll get answers for that. And of course, the Substack, where you can find everything that we do, which comes with all of the receipts. In yesterday's interview, case of yesterday's interview, the original clip and the entire podcast, the entire interview with Sean is in there, so you guys can find that. All of the stories have all of the links and documents in them, so that's your where all of the vault. We go through stuff at kind of rocket speed throughout the show, and you don't have time to get all of that stuff, but that is where you can get it, is on there. And of course, last but not least, get plugged in on Looking Glass Media, guys. We're going to have some we're going to start onboarding. What that means is we're going to start bringing more content creators on there. We've worked out a bunch of the bugs. We're getting some of them trained up. I think we've got 4 or 5 different content creators on there now, but you're going to see more on there. And what I like about LGM personally, even, is I've had some issues here. Some of you guys have showed up and they're like, no live stream tonight, where Rumble has jerked me around, put my show on a different channel, or whatever the case might be. It never deviates on LGM. It's always the same. There's no chat there, but that is reliable. Why can't we comment on LGM? We're working on commenting on these shows themselves, but to have a live stream chat, honestly, guys, it's money. It takes a lot of server power. It's an expense, a monthly expense, and we just don't have it. So right now we're more focused on providing security. People don't have to give up any information to watch there. They don't have to subscribe. They don't have to give an email. You can click on a video and you can click watch. So that's kind of what we're orienting around right now, is security and privacy as we continue to develop. But make no mistake, we are working on it. And last but not least, Twitter, X, guys, that has been the real hot spot, and it gets spicy. I you get to see a different side of me on X than you would here on a live stream. Um, it is I make use of the ability to speak freely and harshly sometimes when it's appropriate. And it's a very interesting and different dynamic. Don't be deceived. It is a giant cesspool at times, but it is also an amazing place to access real-time information when you start to build up a regulars that you get plugged into and follow. You'll find content and information there that is impossible to deliver in any other format, and you'll be able to connect with people as well, which because of exactly those features, I was able to connect with a lady that is filing a class action lawsuit in France against Canada, because of the atrocities of our Canadian government. So we're going to be taping together on Monday. She's a Quebec Canadian. Her English is not perfect. I said, she says her bilingualism is not perfect. I said, okay, neither is mine. So fear not. But we're going to get an exclusive first-time story on another amazing story. So now I have to go back here and scroll through a little bit and see which looks like the most, A's or B's. Some people are both A, B. Whitney Webb is awesome. B. Oh, geez, I should have had somebody else count them because there's too many. I don't know which one has more of. See, there goes my idea. I thought I had a pretty good idea. I was going to let y'all dig into that. All right. Okay. Nana Sue, you clinched it. We're going to go with A today. We will catch the Whitney Webb and Neil Oliver show. I'm going to chip in and interrupt at certain times to add a little bit more. This is very deep, very fast, very dense. And oh, baby ducks, is it full of gold nuggets. But I won't leave everybody hanging on the Antifa story. What I'll do is there's another little segment that has appeared from some other folks that are on onto the trail per se of the crazy folk, the what I actually by definition would call terrorists, but um, we'll go with a short little clip of that, and just so we can give everybody something to chew on. And I don't know, maybe Monday or Tuesday we'll get into the other Antifa one. This will be better for my self confidence not watching my own self do a video. Although the content was amazing, I cannot stand to watch my own shows or listen to my own voice. So we'll catch this little clip from the Son of Plaid, whoever that might be. But this is about Hategate, which is what they named. Now, the reason this was called Hategate is these people looked at the Anti-Hate Network from the context of people that they had falsely people that they had falsely accused of being a terrorist organization, and Trudeau used that weekly to invoke the Emergency Measures Act. So it wasn't just a trucker convoy. The quote-unquote dangerous far-right radicals called Diagolon were what was the straw that broke the camel's back, and Trudeau invoked the emergency measures, and we all know what happened from there. So these guys have been on to that from that context. We'll take 4 minutes and 12 seconds. We'll listen to that. I'll answer a couple of questions. I'll give you a link to the rest of that. If you guys want to plug into that over the weekend.
Evan Balgord, Executive Director of the Canadian Anti.
Evan Balgord. He's a superstar in the other documentary. This guy is a special piece of work.
Hate Network.
Bertie Farber, chair of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network.
He's a nonpartisan nonprofit.
We wear our biases on our sleeves. We are very proudly anti-fascist, and we focus on the far right.
Last summer, we had a 100-year-old church burned to the ground.
Canada's leaders aren't condemning the burning of churches. No, they're endorsing the burning of churches.
I understand that it's not your organization's mandate to talk about these things. As you said, you're clearly focused on the far right.
COVID conspiracy theory.
Safe and effective.
They kill. They kill.
This so-called convoy actually seeded the ground for the worst display of Nazi and racist propaganda that I have ever seen in this country. Bullies, racists, bigots, and Nazis.
We now have over 300 active hate groups in Canada.
There's other...
Every statement was a lie. You know what they're calling a hate group? It could be a Pentecostal church in Manitoba. It would be Pastor Arthur in Calgary, Catholic school in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick. Oh, you don't like Trudeau? You are now suddenly a hate group. Literally, every resistance group has been labeled a hate group through this organization. Bernie Farber is the head of the Mosaic Institute. His best friend, his brother from another mother, is Warren Kinsella of Daisy Group. His lawyer is Richard Warman, incidentally the same lawyer that got David Icke deplatformed in the UK. They have given the UK the formula, shall we say, the system to implement exactly what we're seeing as far as for the Online Harms Act. That all comes from the brain power of these meat muppets that are funded by Justin Trudeau.
Groups that we're very concerned about.
Jeremy McKenzie, the de facto leader of the Diagolon movement, a neo-Nazi organization.
Accelerationists who want to violently overthrow the system.
Fighting, spitting,
No throwing anything. Don't even litter.
who are now also encouraging their members to join.
If there's a speed limit on walking, walk slower than that.
One of the key figures of that, Jeremy McKenzie, his slogan is gun or rope.
If they say it's now illegal to look at the sky, then look at the ground. Be good, for the love of God.
Do you know if the Canada Anti-Hate Network's views about you have been relied upon by law enforcement or other senior officials in the federal government?
Yes, I have.
Diagolon.
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 Diagolon. Far-right extremist group.
We're talking about a group that is organized, driven by an extreme ideology.
A so-called acceleration group.
Formed by a former member of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Which aims to accelerate racial conflict to lead to the eventual creation of a white ethno state.
Its stated purpose is, quote, to incite a race war.
Why a state of emergency?
The federal government is in.
Okay, now I want to be clear here. I understand, Bill, exactly what you're saying. Jeremy McKenzie is another piece of work I question. You have every right to. But that doesn't mean he broke any laws. And it doesn't mean that he is guilty of anything that these guys have charged him with. And that's the point. They pick on people like that because they know we won't defend them. Unless you're somebody like me, I might despise what you say, but I will fight to the death for you to say this. You cannot believe in free speech, except free speech, except. We don't have to like the people, but if we don't believe and allow for free speech. Mr. Bean, I just saw a video of him today. He says the only way that we rid hate speech, the world of hate speech, is to allow a lot more of it. And he's right, because the more offensive it is, the less we pay attention. But right now, everything can be perceived as an insult. So, we don't have to like the guy. We don't have to defend the guy, but we have to defend the free speech and call out the crime of being of what the government is doing. Jeremy McKenzie is unfortunately a creation of the state. It's kind of like Tommy Robinson. These guys would have never become who they are if the state hadn't pushed them too far. And that's what happened with Jeremy McKenzie. When they put Omar Khadr on a CBC TV show and treated him like a hero, that was more than Jeremy could take, having buried so many of his friends in a conflict manifested by those people. So I don't endorse Jeremy, but I will defend his right to be as offensive as he feels he needs to be to expose these corrupt meat muppets. So it's a tough thing to accept. And like I say, I'm not telling anybody to go and follow Jeremy, but we have to understand the crime, because it's Jeremy today. Tomorrow, it's the guy in the UK that posted something that somebody didn't like about alphabet soup on Facebook, and now he's got 3 years in jail for it. That's the difference, right? So they're not going to, it's going to be absolutely arbitrary. Right now, we don't defend people like that. So this is what they're going to do, get rid of them first.
Invoked the Emergencies Act.
That was the crime that Anti-Hate Canada.
Some people just want their lives back. And they enacted the War Measures Act, the Emergency Measures Act, to justify a violent and brutal crackdown on old people and women and wounded veterans. You beat wounded veterans in the street. You scum!
What if I told you the organization and the individuals responsible for pushing this are being exposed right now in Canada?
It all circles back to one group, and that's the Canadian Anti-Hate Network.
That is pretty fair to say.
Liberal-funded Antifa propaganda. That's what the government of Canada was making their decisions on.
We were supposed to confirm things and look into things.
The RCMP recognized that Diagolon was not a criminal group. It was not a terrorist entity, and they had trouble even defining it as a group at all. This whole narrative, they knew it was bunk.
The justification of the Emergencies Act during the trucker convoy came from lies from anonymous Twitter trolls from Anti-Hate.
Uncovered in HateGate is a string of emails from government officials.
Politician goes on TV and says that, oh, there's this terrorist group involved in the convoy. Then people say, can you like back up your statement? And he said, talk to law enforcement. And then law enforcement is like, oh crap, we got to find something. So they just like spend 15 minutes, Google Diagolon, and come up with this hit piece.
That Global News article conveniently sources one expert. That expert is from the Canadian Anti-Hate Network.
But it's the circle jerk, this vicious circle, one person feeding fake information to another who then finances those people to provide the fake information so they can then launder it off to whomever they need to in order to justify whatever fabricated crisis they financed that never existed in the first place.
I consider it the single most embarrassing and grotesque intelligence failure in national history.
Evan Balboard, Executive Director
So
of the
that's-
Canadian Anti.
I just wanted to kind of give you guys a bit of an idea, and again, these guys are absolutely it's a criminal syndicate. These guys have been hired to create enemies that Trudeau and Bill Blair and Mark Mendocino can weaponize the police agencies against us. And the police agencies, the enforcement agencies, they follow orders. So this is where the orders come from. And in the other documentary that I were not watching tonight, boy, I'm really teasing you guys, right? We'll do that Tuesday. We'll do that next Tuesday. Monday will be a surprise guest. Her name is tough for me to pronounce. Gloriane will be on Monday. So Tuesday, we will go into part B of the Anti-Hate Network. So make sure you guys tune in for that one, because that, when I put that one out, it almost destroyed me. The government almost destroyed me. The government tried at that time to turn me into what they turned into Jeremy McKenzie. And I didn't bite like Jeremy did, and it was very interesting. I don't have anything against Jeremy. I don't have anything for Jeremy. He's said some things that I definitely didn't like and don't agree with, but he's also said a lot of good stuff. So take the merit based on the moment is my take on that. And but he had the guts to taunt them and bring them out, so they exposed themselves and gave people enough information so that where we are at now. So in a way, he martyred himself and made himself an open target and said, come and get me here, hold my beer. So I kind of respect that. It's kind of the same way I roll. I mean, he's just got more guts than I do, and in some ways, and he's, he has a personal investment in defending Canada. Right. So that's more to come on that. Yeah, they just did a tour. But we're going to get into something that's going to be maybe a little bit more complex and interesting, maybe a little bit more conundrum raising. It will probably raise a little bit of blood pressure, but I don't know anybody that can deliver, except maybe me, that can deliver the truth so succinctly as Whitney Webb. I think there's a bit of when I watch this, I think there's a bit of a dynamic, a mutual crush between these two, for intellectual crush. But I think this was probably one of the best interviews I've ever seen. I've got it sped up just a little bit so that it doesn't take an hour and a half to get through. So let's enjoy a little bit of this, and I'll try and get to some comments and questions along the way.
Time travelers, get ready to be charmed, challenged, and inspired by my next excellent guest. But before we get started, just a quick reminder to check out my patreon.com site, by means of which you can support the channel. Get along there, show your support, and get early access to new content, exclusive access to question and answer sessions. It's a great site. We enjoy ourselves on there, so come and make it better by being there too. Okay, now time for an inspiring chat. Hi everyone, time for another informative, if not inspirational, conversation with a specialist, someone that can bring unique insight to a subject. Today's guest in question is Whitney Webb, investigative journalist Whitney Webb. Whitney has been, if you're not already aware of her, Whitney has been methodically forensically piecing together the ways that politics and economics and organised crime came together in a hellish, what would you say, menage a trois that helps explain the mess we're in. If you're not aware of Whitney's work, via podcasts and extensive writing, really more to the fact, Substack, published books, then I strongly recommend that you rectify that gap in your knowledge, in your own time, if such a gap exists. Because the story that Whitney tells is, I assure you, more fascinating and compelling and ultimately revealing than any Hollywood thriller you could name. Welcome, Whitney Webb. Many thanks for making time for me.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm frankly in awe of the work that you've been doing. It's your command of detail and how much of it you seem to just hold in your head at any one time. I'm preoccupied with your ability to articulate a story that's so packed with detail. So I'll get right into it. I think, as I said in the intro, people will have varying levels of awareness of the work that you've been doing. But just to get things off on an even keel, was there an identifiable moment, would you say, when our governments and associated establishments became crime?
I gotta pause that for a second, because anybody that said that Whitney Webb is a Marxist needs to have their speaking privileges elsewhere, or you kind of. I mean, I don't know where people come up with some of this shit. Anybody that isn't jumping on board a political train, and I get this a lot too. Just because I won't endorse a single damn politician, well, I must be a Marxist, right? So I encourage people to listen to the facts and get rid of these emotional things that people want to label and stick on people, and judge the moment, follow the money, and who's genuine and being authentic. We don't have to like them. And that's what, when people label somebody a Marxist, it's if they're not doing Marxist shit, don't waste our time, other people's time with it, because all you're doing is making yourself look like you have no discernment. So definitely no Marxist.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different things you can point to, I suppose, throughout American history. So a lot of my work on this particular topic has been mostly focused on the United States, which is where you can probably tell from my accent where I'm from. But the way, I wrote a book called One Nation Under Blackmail that sort of looks at these origins, and sort of where I pinpointed it sort of goes back, I guess, to the 20s and the 30s. More or less where this particular group, which called themselves the National Crime Syndicate, this mix of organized crime factions sort of came together. And then during World War II, they formed an alliance with U.S. military intelligence, the Office of Naval Intelligence. And then in the years after World War II, that alliance deepened, including with the creation of the CIA. And that's why you have so much overlap, for example, with early CIA hitmen and people involved in CIA assassinations being members of the mob as well. And that particular National Crime Syndicate was essentially a meeting of the Italian mafia and the Jewish mob being led by Mayor Lansky, and the Italian mafia being led by Lucky or Charles Luciano. And the two of them were childhood friends. And so previous to their team up, organized crime in the United States was sort of an ethnic silo. So you would have Irish organized crime, Italian organized crime, and so on and so on. It was sort of in these divided by ethnicity. And these two figures, because of their childhood friendship, sort of came together and sort of broke that pattern. They created an organization that became rather infamous called Murder, Inc. And essentially, through their fusion with organized with intelligence, became increasingly powerful. And it sort of they became sort of symbiotic, I've argued. And but really, one of the ways they were able to do that first is they took over the Democratic Party initially, and I definitely argue that they took over both parties relatively quickly. But the way they did so with the Democratic Party, the base of the Democratic Party historically were unions. And so they took over the leadership of the unions and took over the leadership of who counted the votes and all of this very early on in the 20s and the 30s. And, through that, were able to get their candidates through. And there were a few instances where, they threatened, key people's lives in the sort of political hierarchy in New York State. And then through that, were able to sort of move on to dominate the country. And that definitely became very extensive with their team up with intelligence. And it's important to keep in mind that the people that essentially created the CIA and early American intelligence were pretty much all Wall Street bankers and lawyers. People may know about that in the case of...
I want to pull this up. You're right, Billy. Trust no one. But there are people that when you take the facts that they speak of and you go and look for them, try and find any of them, they got absolutely nothing. And when somebody like she speaks and you actually have the, put in the effort to go and do the homework and the research, prove her wrong. I dare anybody to prove Whitney wrong. Bring it to me. If you've got evidence to prove Whitney wrong, I would love to hear it. And this is why I listen to Whitney Webb, and I will go and I will corroborate to the best of my ability. But the thing that I like particularly about this interview is I've already done all of that. She's corroborating a whole lot and connecting dots that I've already done the work on, where it takes me an hour to make one point. She just snaps it all together here for this. I know it sounds a little bit odd. I'll slow it down for everybody just because it just sounds so foreign to me as well. Sorry, guys. I'll put it back to normal speed for everybody. She talks extremely fast to begin with. I wondered if that would be okay because of the way she talks, but no, we'll go back to slow speed. You just guys are going to have to hang out a little longer. That's all.
Rather infamous CIA directors like Alan Dulles being from the Wall Street law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, but the leader of the OSS, which was sort of the precursor to the CIA, Bill Donovan, was also deeply tied to Wall Street, and even former CIA deputy directors from just 20 years ago have essentially said the CIA has always sort of been bankers. And so, bankers and organized crime, a lot of them are interested in, wealth and ultimately rackets. So if you think of organized crime sort of as its own entity.
I want to just highlight there. Thanks, Steve. Come spam with everybody else's channel and then bugger off. I hope you're spamming all of their channels with my show too. Thanks. Nice to see you. When she's talking about this is important. If you want to know about CIA and banking and how deep that goes, don't do it on Google, but go to an alternative search engine and look up the Safari Club.
The team sort of take away all the associations we have with it because of Hollywood and all of these other narratives. Essentially, what it exists to do is expand the rackets that are lucrative and perpetuate them infinitely. Because if the racket is discovered or the organized crime syndicate is broken up, the flow of money stops. And so a lot of these lucrative rackets is later, intelligence later became very involved in them. These include things like arms trafficking and drug trafficking. These used to be the rackets of the mob, but by teaming up with intelligence, they were able to expand them and dominate them. And as a result, a lot of the Wall Street banks have become sort of dependent on money laundering. The income they make from money laundering from all of these illegal rackets has become, really critical to their operations. And people like Catherine Austin Fitts have argued that if, the drug trade were actually to be stopped in any meaningful way, we'd see a collapse of some of the biggest banks in the world. Which is why you have, banks like HSBC, for example, getting caught money laundering for some of the biggest and most criminal Mexican drug cartels. And then people like Mark Carney stepping in to try and smooth things over. Of course, he's the former governor of the Bank of
Mark Carney, the supposed replacement. The media is saying, oh, poo, poo, poo. People don't know who this Mark Carney guy is. They should. He's going to replace Trudeau and fix Canada. No. Mark Carney is guilty of crimes on a global scale far beyond anything Trudeau has ever aspired to achieve, as you just heard here about his time at the international banking and the messes that he's cleaned up for the drug cartels and HSBC. And we're not even going to go into that kind of corruption on this show here today, but throughout this interview, she connects finally back several times to the cesspool that is the Laurentian elite in Canada. They are absolutely horrible. They've been here for far too long, and almost none of these talking heads in the U.S. give any of these swamp creatures in Canada the appropriate level of credit, in my opinion, for their achievements. But here tonight, we're going to get a chance to connect a few of those.
England and Make Up Canada, and is slated to follow Justin Trudeau, allegedly, as head of the left-leaning Canadian, political sphere. So, sorry, went on a little bit of a rant there. I don't know if you'd like to.
Is it the case simply that are we dealing with two versions, two sides of the same coin? It's the mindset of the Wall Street banker. Is the mindset of the power-hungry politician essentially the same as the mindset of the of the Al Capone and the Meyer Lansky and the Lucky Luciano? Are they all just manifestations of the same character traits?
Yeah, I think it's become increasingly similar with time, and ultimately, a lot of these people have that function like mob families or have documented ties to organized crime. For example, I've done a lot of work on the Jeffrey Epstein case, and his main patron is an American billionaire named Leslie Wexner, who has documented ties to organized crime to the extent that he's from Columbus, Ohio. The Columbus, Ohio police had put out a report on his ties to organized crime, and it was shut down by the Columbus police chief, who had ties to Wexner and was providing police officers to Wexner's home, like for security and a lot of other corruption there, and essentially covered it up. And those ties came up because his tax lawyer was murdered in broad daylight, shot in the face, and what is considered still an unsolved mystery, even though they did solve it and tied it to Wexner, but they buried their report. And the lawyer was murdered the day before he was going to testify to the IRS about tax evasion, about unspecified things, but he was the lawyer for Wexner's business interests at the Limited. So a lot of these people have spent an insane amount of money rebranding themselves as philanthropists. So I think one figure that was sort of exposed as doing that during the COVID era, of course, is someone like Bill Gates, right? Who has spent a lot of money framing himself as altruistic and as a philanthropist, but a lot of these guys do that. And in reality, this is something from the playbook that was taken from J.D. Rockefeller, the United States' first billionaire, who was very much hated for what he was doing to the country, back in the early 20th century, and tried to rebrand himself as a philanthropist, and did so with the help of people like Edward Bernays, who is considered the father both of propaganda and public relations, which I guess you could argue public relations is essentially propaganda for the corporate sector. But there's been a lot of manipulations on the public in trying to change our perception of who these people are and what they do. But consistently, these particular networks, a lot of whom are connected to organized crime, have been engaging crisis after crisis that the world has experienced in massive wealth transfers for us to them. And COVID's a great example of that. Where so many people that seem to have apparent foreknowledge that something drastic was coming were able to benefit so hugely economically, while the rest of us obviously have been left in a very different situation. And it's true if you look at the 2008 financial crisis or any number of other financial crises, that have happened in the past 100 years. You have pretty consistent wealth transfer to the point where like the 0.1% of the world have such an insane amount of wealth and power at this point. And we're still being so manipulated by them to the point where, at least in the United States right now, people are clamoring for competing squads of billionaires to save the country. So, you might have Donald Trump and Elon Musk on one side, and then all the Democratic Party donors, many of whom are from Silicon Valley, like Eric Schmidt and Pierre Omidyar, and a lot of these other big names, these oligarch figures, which billionaire faction is going to save us all. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they've been stealing our wealth and convincing us to give away our freedoms in exchange for what they promise is security. But we don't get security. We just get less and less freedom. And we're essentially being herded into what I would argue is sort of a technocratic nightmare, the cornerstone of which is this digital ID agenda, which is meant to be linked to some sort of digital wallet that contains programmable, surveillable money, either a CBDC issued by a central bank or issued by a private bank. And I think ultimately what people need to do is not focus so much on these political saviors being put out in front of us, but focus on what we're going to do to not comply with the digital ID agenda and these other things that they need in order to push us into this world that they've been building. And I would really appreciate it if people would focus on that again, because I think there was a lot of consciousness generated around that during COVID, for example, where people rightly, in my opinion, pointed out that vaccine passports are really sort of a trial run for a lot of this broader digital ID stuff. But the digital ID stuff is marching full speed ahead. And now in the United States, a lot of the people that were critical of it as vaccine passports are essentially calling for it. I mean, you have people like Trump on the campaign trail saying the U.S. desperately needs a biometric entry-exit system. And you have this campaign lawyer going on podcasts saying we need to scan our face on our eyeballs in order to be able to vote in the United States. If we need voter ID, why can't we just use a physical ID? or something like that. Why does it have to be biometric and digital? And then you see that, the Trump campaign, just like the Democratic Party, are beholden to these Silicon Valley donors. A good example of that would be Trump's recent VP pick, J.D. Vance, who's intimately tied up with Peter Thiel, who created a CIA-funded data mining companies that are surveilling Americans and profiling them for intelligence based on our online activity, and are very much invested in these digital ID agendas and digital wallet agendas, and these programmable, surveillable currencies. And again, I think we need to focus more on what we can do as people and as communities, and not think that we can just sit back in our armchair and just vote, once every 4 years or once every, X number of years between election cycles, and everything's going to be magically better. I think people need to take responsibility and think about what we can do as people to opt out of these systems that they're trying to impose on us.
You've already done, Whitney, what mystifies me, what fascinates you, which you've already listed a mind-boggling cast of characters. You've already it's part of what reveals, makes plain the interconnectedness. Whoever it was, Einstein or John Muir or whoever, who said that if you pick up one thing in the universe, you find it's connected to everything else. And your research seems to make plain that whoever you look at is somehow connected to everyone else. And you were talking there about how these competing camps of billionaires, trying to persuade us, which way to jump next.
Right.
I wonder if, in your research, if you've come across, is there anyone out there in that, whatever, the billionaire or the influential or the powerful fraternity that's a goodie, or are they all just degrees of badness?
Well, as far as the 0.1% goes, there's a lot of names that are put out in front of us, and then there's a lot of people even wealthier than them that we don't even see. And I think a lot of the billionaires that are put out in front of us, people like the Silicon Valley oligarchs for sure, were allowed to become billionaires for particular reasons. And some of them, started off creating companies that became huge in Silicon Valley, but they teamed up very early on with the national security state. And then that allowed them to become these monopolies, and you see a lot of CIA involvement in most of these big Silicon Valley companies. And so they were really public-private partnerships, I guess you could say, from the off. And these include Google, which has CIA origins, Oracle, which started as CIA's Project Oracle, that Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison was working on right before he made Oracle the company, and which then became a CIA contractor. You have Palantir, Peter Thiel's company after PayPal, its first funder being the CIA, and then its only client until 2008 was the CIA, and then its engineers made over 200 visits between 2005 and 2009 to CIA headquarters to develop their product. That company, of course, for those living in the UK, now controls all of the NHS data and has since COVID. And it's the same for the United States as well, including efforts to predict the next pandemic before it even happens based on various samples taken from people in these health systems. So, and again, they're contractors for intelligence, the Homeland Security and all of these other security agencies profiling people as subversives. They were the first company used by the United States government to target WikiLeaks, and they had a plan called the WikiLeaks threat they put out pretty early on, I think in 2010 or 2011 or so, and had been going after free speech for a very long time, and targeting Americans for domestic dissent and putting them on the CIA naughty list, I guess you could say, of Americans who could be targeted and have their constitutional rights suspended if certain continuity of government protocols were ever invoked. And these are people that are held up to us as good billionaires. Peter Thiel, for example, is framed as a libertarian, but if he's a libertarian, why would he build a company that would give the state this kind of power? I mean, it honestly doesn't really make very much sense at all. And, someone like Elon Musk, too, has been framed as sort of a hero. I would argue that's sort of been manufactured. I mean, this is someone who's very open about being a Pentagon contractor, now an intelligence contractor, building spy satellites for U.S. intelligence agencies, and also building brain chips. Which I, just on the face of it, don't really trust that technology at all. And
I just wanted to add a quick little comment in there about Elon Musk being a contractor to the United States military. He is, in fact, the largest contractor to the military. So, interesting side note.
And, is trying to make Twitter half of the U.S. financial system and have you link your government issued ID to your social media account and then tie that to your finances, hoping to make, Twitter a major bank and all of this stuff. When you can be, depersoned from Twitter easily, I guess that would mean that when Twitter becomes a bank, you could also be debanked quite easily as well. I think a lot of these people, they have a lot of capital at their disposal. They have a lot of money used to make us think certain things about them and think they're squabbling. But if you look, like at Peter Thiel, I mentioned, he's, very much aligned with the U.S. Republican Party right now. And then you look at someone like Eric Schmidt, who's essentially been running key aspects of the Biden administration and was a major Clinton donor. They're both steering members of the steering committee of the Bilderberg Conference, which is an overtly globalist conference closed to the public where top politicians from around the world, top corporate leaders, and top people from the quote unquote nonprofit sector come together to decide essentially.
That's where the Jason Kennys of Canada and the Aga Khans and those guys get together for one of their business directional meetings. That's where they decide what the WEF is going to champion, what the policies the United Nations is going to implement, and people like Aga Khan sit on the big throne at the Bilderberg meetings.
What's going to happen in the world over the next couple of years. So they seem to agree on a lot more than they don't agree at these globalist confabs, which doesn't just include Bilderberg, it includes things like the World Economic Forum annual meeting or the Allen and Company Sun Valley Conference. I mean, there's infinite number of these that go on, but they seem to be quite cozy, when they're together in these sort of elite conclaves. But for us in the public, they sort of, create I would argue a lot of bread and circuses. So maybe there are good billionaires out there, but I think the ones that are pushed out in front of us and that we're sort of being manipulated into seeing as our heroes and saviors, let's just sit back and let Elon Musk save us from tyranny or things like that. I think that's investing a lot in people who have questionable business relationships, and people seem to get caught up in the rhetoric, whether it's rhetoric about people like Elon Musk or campaign rhetoric. When it comes to politicians, and they don't focus on, they don't follow the money, and they don't follow people's policy records when it comes to politicians or their business decisions and business relationships when it comes to, the other type of billionaire.
It's so troubling, the all-encompassing picture that you paint. But do you think there's any degree or any extent to which the looming threat of, as you were describing it, as a digital gulag archipelago is illusory? Clearly, the mood music is to persuade us that once this digital cage closes, there's no escape for anyone forever. But do you think there's any extent to which it's not the case? You talked about the necessity to find other platforms to look at other ways of doing things, to turn our backs on some of these sort of preeminent figures. Is there any way in which we're being tricked into thinking that they have more potential control than they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think they absolutely do. And I think that's part of, the manipulations that target the public, or to make us think that we're powerless and we have no power. And these people have invested so much money on finding every excuse they can to try and get us, in the case of digital ID, get us to voluntarily want to adopt it. And we have to focus on the fact that if digital ID does not succeed and people do not comply, it will fail. I mean, it is the cornerstone of like the entire UN Agenda 2030. Without it, the programmable surveillable money won't work. A lot of their designs for what they want to do in the online virtual world will not work. And so much of it will not work if we do not comply with digital ID, and they're trying to force it on us as a voluntary thing. Sort of in the same way that vaccine passports were voluntary, which is why I encourage people, if you want to change the direction the world is going, you need to figure out how you are going to set up your life so you don't have to comply with digital ID the same way. Maybe if you were forced to comply with vaccine mandates and vaccine passports, how will you get around those type of restrictions? when they try and impose, digital ID on people for various reasons. As I said earlier, before it was about, the vaccine and all of that. Now in the US, conservatives mainly are being pitched as this is a solution to illegal migration. This is a solution to voter fraud and all of this stuff. There's efforts to frame biometric digital ID as essential to solving cybercrime and hacking and cyberbullying and any other normal of essentially any ill of society. They're just going to say digital ID is going to be the solution to that. And they're sales pitches and people like, but ultimately if we, the digital ID is essential to the whole idea of the social credit score and any of these other, Orwellian designs that, at least enough people I hope know by now, is part and parcel of this agenda. And I think, again, it comes up to people having to make a choice. And the way they do this is through, they try and get us to comply with this is through convenience. It's convenience to opt in. It's convenient to have a digital ID. It's convenient to have, money on your phone and have your whole life be based on your smartphone and all of this. It's convenient to vote once every 4 years for one of the two lesser evils in all of this. But really, it's the convenience that they're using to enslave us. And it's inconvenient to find ways to opt out of these systems and change your life so that you're more resilient and your life is actually sustainable for you and your family and your community. It's perhaps inconvenient to get out off of the couch and off of the chair and go meet your neighbors physically and stop being on the online world so much and making real human connections and real human solutions to the problems we're facing. Because, again, that's why during COVID, the lockdowns, I think, were a big part of it, to keep people isolated, to keep people from connecting and force people to feel like they could only connect with others through this virtual world that these people control. Because they control the infrastructure,
Now, before she gets on the next thing there, I wanted to highlight the importance of this digital ID conversation. We take it in passing, but this is what I'm afraid of right now. With 42% of Canadians that have jobs, they work for the government. So if the government decides that's the only way they're going to get paid, those 42% of Canadians will probably accept it. When you look at all of the rest of the wages that they are subsidizing across the country, which is pretty much every non-old stack Canadian, all the new Canadians are subsidized by the government. Of course, they're going to accept these kinds of things. So how many of us does that leave left to resist the UBI digital ID thing, guys? This is what really frightens me right now. Is that people are going to be desperate, and they're going to have control over so many people's income that people will acquiesce to all of this. And the other point that I really wanted to stress is, she's 100% correct. We need to develop and fortify our relationships, our community outside of the digital space, in the real world. Because when this all comes to pass, the censorship, what are we all going to do when we're disconnected? If they pull the plug on us, what do we do then? Our resistance is toast, right? So she makes some incredibly valid points here, and she's making these points from like a mother as well. So things that we need to consider. I'll touch on that one a little bit, because that's the kind of Canadians that I come from, and no, they're not so great on compliance. You go to a solid Mennonite community, and they don't try too many of their flying monkey games in Mennonite communities, because then there isn't just one Wayne. They've got a whole community of Waynes, and they just don't like that, to mess around with that kind of stuff. So no, the Mennonites will not comply. The Amish will not comply. There's a story breaking how Trudeau tried to fine the Amish $400,000 because they wouldn't sign up for Arrive Can. These are the pressure tactics that they feel liberated enough, entitled enough to try and enforce, thanks to organizations like the Anti-Hate Network that deems them as a dangerous threat, just like Catholics and Christians and anybody else. So no, they won't comply, and that's what we're going to have to do, and we're going to have to starve them out is ultimately how we're going to have to win. And if we don't need anything the government has to offer, and we don't take them up on that, they'll bring the sticks. If the carrots don't work, they'll bring the sticks. That's kind of where we're at here now. But we're going to have to, be resolved and committed to not complying.
Software and the platforms. So I think, people need to consider that this convenience is really the carrot. Maybe there will be a stick at some point, but they seem to be focused a lot on the carrot and the idea of having us voluntarily adopt these things because it's easy, the way they're setting things up, or it will be easy. Or they'll frame it that way at least. But I think it's very important for people to realize that they have the power. Otherwise, they wouldn't be investing all this money to manipulate us and pitch us on this. And I think it's important for people to think critically about what's being done. And I think, there's a lot of efforts to manipulate prominent voices in alternative media for the purpose of getting people who have realized these agendas during COVID, at least, or maybe before, to come back sort of into the fold and trust certain people that are selling these particular solutions under different metrics. And anyway, again, I think, there is a lot of hope, and a lot of people, listen to my interviews or read my reports and think it's, very black pilling or depressing and whatever. But ultimately, I think it's more depressing to feel like we don't have any power to change things, only the billionaires do. I think that's a very depressing outlook, personally. And I think these are people we should not be trusting, considering the state of the world and where we are going. And we should take the power back as people. And we do that by taking actions in our own lives and doing things in our neighborhoods and our communities and with our families, and realizing that this is not where we want to go. At the end of the day. And there is so much we can do. And I think a good starting point, again, is to say no to digital ID. We don't need this biometric digital ID surveillance state that's going to be used not just to surveil what we're doing in real time, but also to predict what we might do in the future. A lot of these plans on the books and things that are being developed by these intelligence agencies are all about predictive policing, meaning pre-crime, and also applying that same methodology to healthcare. Prevent the next pandemic before it happens, and all of this stuff. So you don't even need to declare a pandemic anymore to get emergency use authorization or mandates in particular communities and stuff like that. That is the world that you're setting up. It is very bad, and we should opt out, and we can opt out.
I don't find what you're saying, none of what I've listened to you saying now and over months and years, I don't find it depressing, because I firmly believe that knowledge is power and that you can't know enough. And so I think that you're simply, laying out, often in very condensed and detail-rich material, the things that people need to know. And I wonder, at the moment, it seems to me that things have got especially visible and ridiculous.
I have to take a moment here and empathize with Whitney in this. I struggle at times, guys, because I feel like all I'm doing is just delivering nightmares to everybody. But on the other side of that very same coin, I feel like Neil does, in that we can't fix it if we can't identify it, see it, understand it, and come together to do something about it. So, I know there are people out there that call me negative or depressing. That's not the intent. I want people to be inspired and invigorated by the knowledge. When we uncover this stuff, then we have a better idea of what we can do about it. So I feel for both of these folks here right at the moment.
The whole, sure. The attempted shooting of Donald Trump, followed almost literally moments later by Joe Biden being, erased from the presidential ticket. Other spectacles like Benjamin Netanyahu and the standing ovations that he received in Congress. Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine being invited to sit in on a cabinet meeting for the new Labour government in 10 Downing Street. it feels as though what many people are now calling the Leviathan as a noun to describe the blob or the deep state, that the Leviathan has never been so on the surface, so visible as it is now. And I wonder at the extent to which, in their final pursuit of digital IDs and CBDCs and 15-minute cities and all of the rest of it, that they aren't actually running scared, and that to some extent the initiative is with us, so many of us, millions of us, who have seen the Leviathan surface.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think they're being more overt because, I think they're very arrogant. I think they think that they are very confident in their abilities to manipulate people, which they certainly absolutely can. And they can manipulate people very effectively. But ultimately, I think, a lot of their arrogance is their downfall. But it's up to us, once again, to show that they're wrong and show that we're not powerless, that we're not completely dumbed down and egocentric and just focused on hedonistic pursuits, and that we actually care about the state of the world, the future for our children. We're going to say no to these Orwellian systems that are being rolled out globally. I mean, digital ID is something that is being pushed through so fast. The EU is adopting it now for entry-exit stuff. The UK is going to roll it out next year. The US is pushing for it as the only solution to migration and to voter fraud. And Donald Trump is essentially now a shoo-in, and he's been promoting all of these things on the campaign trail. Where I live in Chile is rolling out digital ID, right after Christmas this year. And it's voluntary for now, but all of these things are going to be voluntary at first, and then they'll try and make it so it's, involuntary, essentially. You don't have the smartphone, you don't have the ID, well, you can't come in here. And I think people, again, need to prepare for ultimately what to do about that, and to sort of, maybe it's inconvenient to not have constant access to these platforms and these things at your fingertips, but there's other things, there's alternatives we can build, and we have time to do that now. And I think that's where a lot of the focus should be, and not so much on the circus. But again, I think people too, what's unfortunate now, particularly in like election season, a lot of people that know that it's a uniparty, whether in the UK or, the United States, that know that, like, in the UK, the Tories and Labour agree on so much more than they don't when they're actually in power, illegal migration just being one example. And then when you look at the US and the Republicans and the Democrats, pro-surveillance, pro-war, pro any other number of things, pro-Israel, pro-oligarch, essentially, at the end of the day, and nothing really ever gets solved. The problems continue. And maybe, the argument ends up being, well, if we elect this guy, the march towards this tyranny will be slightly slower than if the other guy gets in. I mean, is that really the best we can do? And at this point, people that were aware of the uniparty getting sucked into this tribalist mindset of, I support this guy instead of this guy and all of that. I mean, I think we need to step back and realize that voting for the lesser of two evils every 4 years is going to we're going to end up in the exact same place as if we just sat back and did literally nothing. And I don't really think that this is the only solution that people should pursue. I mean, I think it's honestly insanity, especially considering what we saw with COVID, where essentially every country in the world adopted the same policies, and it made no sense to do so. And now the people that criticized that at the time, despite all of the backlash and all of the name calling, have been proven right. And now, if you're criticizing both of the candidates in the U.S. presidential race, as I am, I'm getting called, accused of rooting for the other guy, or having Trump derangement syndrome, or, being a Trumper also, which I was also called during COVID, even though I was very critical of Trump's first term. And it's just, this tribalist madness. People really need to snap out of it. They're so good at manipulating us and dividing and conquering us. And we need to realize that this is an issue of us versus them, the them being the 0.1% of this global oligarchy that is taking control of both the public and the private sector, and have essentially created what my colleague Ian Davis calls the global public-private partnership, which is, again,
Now I got to pause there, because there's a few things there that I really want to hit on. I totally empathize with Whitney, and we've gotten to this point of tribalism where if you don't support my guy, then you must be the enemy. There is no, which baffles me. Nobody trusts the left-wing media because they're 100% left. But yet if you want to be on the middle, you're demonized because you're not 100% right by the people on the right. And if you point out the flaws in any of the political parties, people's heads explode and you must be the demon. I get a lot of this. I don't get too many NDP supporters, but the instant I say something negative about Trudeau, then the conservatives are yay. If I say something about something negative about Pierre Poilievre, the PPC are going yay. And if I say something negative about the PPC, oh, and they're all exploding their heads. And it's it's none of it is going to fix Canada. Is my point. I don't want people being led down the lying path. And I've kind of made it really blunt and simple, and I am a simple guy at the end of the day. Both the Liberal and the Conservative Party, as we've showed many times on this platform right here, I've showed you guys the documents. Pierre and Justin have signed the same damn documents. They have the same to-do list. And people say, well, that means Max is the only alternative. And my question to that is, will Max hold constitutional conventions and seat a de jure Canadian government? Not ever. What does that mean? That's the sad part. Nobody knows how to actually fix Canada because they don't understand what de jure means. What does de jure mean? De jure means lawful. We do not have a lawful government. And I have challenged several federal MPs. Why don't we have a lawful government? Why do we run a de facto criminal organization and think that voting is going to change it? And they say, well, we rule through implied consent. So not one of these politicians, Max included, will do the right thing and allow Canadians to become a sovereign, lawful country. So in that basic facts, I don't support any of them, not a single one of them, because not a single one of them is telling you, the people, the truth. And the only way out of that is to pull an Iceland. We have every right to hold constitutional conventions and determine our own future. But the only province that really understands that is Quebec. The rest of Canada is completely disengaged, don't want to know. They want 5 minutes of responsibility every 4 years and pretend that the next guy is going to change things. And that's not going to change anything ever. So I really empathize with her trying to show people the only real path to solution and remedy, and getting crucified from all four directions for it is brutal some days. And I'm not speaking about you guys. You guys here have been hearing me talk about this for a very long time. And that's the other thing, and I I went on a bit of a rip on Sean's show last night. Everybody in the universe is harping about the 11 people that have been corrupted by foreign influence. Why won't you give us the names? Well, because if they start applying the lens of illegal foreign influence, all 338, every last one of them, is guilty of committing treason against Canadians the instant they signed to implement policy created, dreamt up in faraway lands at Bilderberg conventions and Geneva halls. Those policies, no Canadians were given any option to have a say in. Why? Because they didn't have to. Why? Because they're pirates and they're criminals in a de facto government. So the only freaking way, honestly, guys, is to pull an Iceland, force constitutional conventions. Quebec's going to do it anyways because the crooks aren't going to stop. And there's enough Canadians elsewhere that are not going to stop Quebec from doing it the next time. And at that point, the rest of Canada is going to get blindsided and going, what's happening? Our country fell apart and nobody knows what to do. Well, nobody wants to listen to what to do because they want it to be solved one day every 4 years. So this is the problem that we face as Canadians, and nobody's coming to save us, guys. It's going to be up to us.
A lot of people in talking about the World Economic Forum during COVID, painted it as communist. Well, it promotes itself as the main broker of public-private partnerships worldwide.
By definition, fascism. But she's going to touch on a little bit more of that.
Which is, really more in line with what Mussolini defined as corporatism, a fusing of the public sector and the corporate sector, or rather, certain corporate monopolies fusing with the state. And that is essentially what we have. And that's what these public-private partnerships are. And they don't work, but we're being pushed into an even greater deepening of them. And I think there's also efforts right now in a post-COVID era that they're going to do a controlled demolition of certain public sector institutions that they've blamed for everything that's happened, and then take things directly into the hands of these private sector monopolies that essentially control the politicians and the public sector anyway, and is essentially just a bait and switch to get people to think that change is coming, but it's not. And this type of hope and change energy, as I call it, because of the initial Barack Obama campaign in 2008, they try and do this with all these different politicians around the world who are routinely disappointing. They did it, with Javier Milei in Argentina, who, since he's been in power, has been like, yes, I'm going to destroy the Ministry of Education, but I want Facebook to be in charge of the Ministry of Education, and Google AI to decide who I fire and who I hire within the government, and outsourcing Argentinian lithium to Israel, saying that he was going to put that he was against the Argentinian establishment, but he's put people that were in the previous very establishment administration, the Macri administration, in his cabinet, including major bankers from JP Morgan in charge of the economy, JP Morgan being one of the banks that helped saddle Argentina as far back as the 1980s with the insane debt problems it has today. It makes absolutely no sense. Based on what his campaign pitch was, and people need to remember that campaign rhetoric and sales pitches to get you to voluntarily acquiesce to the leadership of someone who, in the case of a lot of the politicians running in the US now, they've been president before, and they've made it very clear who they serve when they're in office, and we're being led to believe that it'll be different this time. And they did that with liberals in 2012 with Obama. Oh, he just needs 4 more years. Oh, it was the Republicans. Oh, it was this that prevented him from doing what he was supposed to do his first term, and then his second term was worse. And I think it'll be just the same with Trump, who bent over backwards during the COVID era to this global agenda. He called on Silicon Valley to surveil social media users and profile them for pre-crime, so they could prevent shootings before they happen. That's a conservative president. I mean, that's a horrible policy. When COVID was happening, he essentially outsourced COVID era fiscal policy to BlackRock's Larry Fink, and BlackRock handed out all the money that the Federal Reserve printed, and Larry Fink used to handle, Donald Trump's personal fortune and stuff. It's crony capitalism at the end of the day. And if you want to think he's different this time, fine, but we can't put all of our faith and all of our eggs in one basket for people that have already shown us who they are. And I think these political saviors are made up, and they try and get energy behind them in all of this. And so many people that know better fall for it routinely. And I think we need to realize the extent to which we're being manipulated. And even if you know that mainstream media lies, that doesn't mean that other people aren't also lying to you or manipulating to you, because a lot of people, even in independent media, have become very beholden to the same algorithms that mainstream media are now beholden to. And the people that control those algorithms are these same Silicon Valley oligarchs who finance both parties and manipulate, essentially control our politicians. And it's important to keep in mind in the United States as well, that Silicon Valley has essentially merged with the national security state. They're contractors for the military, they're contractors for intelligence, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all of these guys, that's what they do. And they manipulate us on their behalf. In 2014, the U.S.
I want to just pause there and add a little side notes to it. About a year and a half ago, I did a deep dive for the Wendy Bell Network on the tech, Silicon Valley, and the money that they were putting into pre-crime. And Whitney's right. Trump was all for advancing technology for Big Brother and surveillance. I was pretty disappointed to hear that, and when I started looking into what some of these companies in Silicon Valley are up to, it made my skin crawl. That was where I realized that all of these intelligence agents that they trained up for 30 or 40 years or 30 years, I guess, of warfare in the Middle East, when they all came back, they all got, the best of these spies and intelligence experts all got jobs in Silicon Valley, and their skill sets were put to work, focused on us, the American people, Canadian people, the West. So they become very very highly trained, skilled, and funded. And when it comes to that part of the fence, all world leaders like to know everything, right? So, yeah, disappointing to me as well.
U.S. Air Force announced a multi-million-dollar research project to use social media to control people like drones, to basically turn people's minds off using social media and manipulate them that way. And militaries around the world, I know it's true in the UK too, with what I believe is might be wrong, but I think it's like the 77th Brigade or something like that. There's all of these military agencies and security agencies focused on manipulating online opinion. And they've invested millions of dollars in bot armies. And do you think that someone that is a contractor for the Pentagon and for these militaries around the world now through SpaceX is going to say no to those same militaries' bot armies that they've developed to manipulate people's opinion on behalf of the so-called deep state that we're all supposed to be targeting and fighting against? I think people really need to take this stuff seriously and realize that, waking up to the illusions around COVID and mainstream media isn't necessarily enough. We need to keep our guard up. We need to think critically and rationally, and we need to question everything, and we need to go straight to the source. That's why I make an effort in all of my articles to extensively hyperlink and source everything I say. Please go engage with that material yourself. Look at the things I researched and the sources I used and draw your own conclusions. Maybe you don't agree with me, but I think, a lot of people that woke up, I guess, from mainstream media have moved to maybe different sources, but their relationship with media is the same. Just listen to what the person says and take their word for it, and don't do any due diligence or research. And I think people need to become, just like we need to take individual responsibility with our lives, we need to take responsibility for the media we consume as well, and become active consumers of media, not just passive media consumers, or we'll just continue to be manipulated in this way and distracted.
Have you found in your extensive efforts to find alternative ways, have you found a channel or channels that you trust? You talked there about the way in which the algorithms are affecting increasingly the independent journalists, and people are becoming beholden to the same things that have united the mainstream media of old. Cryptocurrencies, there's so much heat around whatever a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and the rest. I hear a lot of people talk about how blockchain, as it manifests in Bitcoin, but blockchain and distributed ledger may have within it the seeds of something that is genuinely free and that's genuinely peer-to-peer. Are you confident that in the brave new world that you espouse, that there are already the seeds of channels and mediums of exchange that aren't dirty and tainted and controlled by the usual suspects?
I think, there was, for example, you bringing up Bitcoin, maybe initially with Bitcoin, there was some promise there. But I think, in a lot of my recent work on this with the former editor-in-chief of Bitcoin Magazine, Mark Goodwin, we focused a lot on how in recent years, really beginning in 2010, if not earlier, there's been a major effort to capture Bitcoin and the infrastructure and essentially dollarize it, have it become, a tool of U.S. dollar hegemony. And there's a lot of efforts to link it to these U.S. dollar stable coins that are very questionable, whether it's Tether, USDC. Yes, or Circle, USDC, which is very much tied to BlackRock. Tether was very much tied to the FTX scandal, and also has a lot of interesting ties to the Epstein crowd as well, if you go far enough back. And
I just wanted to, when she said BlackRock there, I just wanted to remind folks that BlackRock pays Canadian billionaire Dave Thompson $9.7 billion per year to deliver the news to Reuters. Reuters being the cornerstone, the trusted source of the world. Even the conservative right trusts Reuters, but yet BlackRock funds it all.
These are sort of being framed as alternatives, but, Tether, for example, recently allowed onto its platform the FBI and the Secret Service to surveil users and decide what wallets they can just shut down at will, and have said that they want to be a key partner of the U.S. in expanding dollar hegemony globally. Ultimately, Bitcoin was framed as something that's going to stop irresponsible money printing and central bank policy and government fiscal policy. But what's happening right now is that there's efforts to basically use Bitcoin as a sink to hyperinflate into. So basically, to make it the greatest enabler ever of that irresponsible central bank policy. And I think, that's part of why, that this effort to sort of dominate a lot of the infrastructure around Bitcoin, the on and off ramps, is why you're seeing people like BlackRock's Larry Fink changing his tune on Bitcoin, and allegedly Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan has, and all of these other Wall Street guys, because they think it's something they can use and they can control. And sure, people can use it, but the way they're trying to set it up and impose it and develop regulations for it, they're going to try and prevent the use cases where it actually would enable freedom. So for those, that are in the Bitcoin community or developers, now is the time to try and develop solutions that hedge against that. Because again, it's important to be vigilant in the Bitcoin community, just like so many other, communities in.
I just want to pause there for a second, guys, and say she's got a very strong point there. We have a little bit of time left to build alternative systems, right? And this is why we're building LGM, which is outside of their reach. We need other people that have the ability or the skill sets or the financial capacity to get behind projects that people are building for that live outside of their reach. So this is a big point that I want people to build stuff elsewhere. And I was talking to somebody today where they have a huge following, but if they get unplugged from social media, like somebody like Stefan Molyneux, perhaps, it's all gone because they don't own any digital real estate. They don't own any space on the internet. They can't build on there and still be there. Somebody can take it away from them. This was the lesson that I learned when they took What's Up Canada .ca and .com away from me, and why we ultimately ended up with a .org, because I had to build it where they couldn't reach. And that was the same concept behind LGM.news, building stuff that they can't reach. And we have to do this with everything. We have to build a functional infrastructure that isn't Ready Player One, that isn't dependent on the digital avatar verse.
Sort of this effort to fight against tyranny. They're being told, just sit back in your armchair, relax, trust the plan, and Bitcoin, because it's so great, will magically solve all of these problems, while they're basically making it this tool of the dollar and all of that. And that sort of effort to sell people into this complacent mindset is happening across the board. And I think it's something we really, really need to resist. We're being lulled to sleep. And it reminds me a lot of, QAnon in the Trump era, where we just need to sit back and trust the plan, even though Trump is not keeping his campaign promises and doing things that are very against what he campaigned on. We need to hold our politicians to account. We need to hold people in media to account, and really, just be, I don't know, have individual responsibility. I feel like I'm just a broken record with that, but I think I think it's very important. And at this point, even if Bitcoin is co-opted, I think there are things that can be done.
Again, I relate to Whitney Webb. Maybe that's why I appreciate her work, because we harp on so many of the same things. Nobody's coming to save us. This is personal responsibility. We've done pretty good as individuals, protecting ourselves, fortifying ourselves, preparing ourselves, but we need to strengthen that. We need to fortify our communities, make sure our neighbors have the things, the stability and support. It's again, it's up to us, and they keep giving us things to fight and squabble over, and we keep taking the bait and biting on it and finding any excuse or reason we can to squabble and argue and disagree instead of coming together and putting our nose to the grindstone and getting some dang work done. But that's just me harping, like Whitney.
To use it, sort of invert what they're trying to do to it, and use it to sort of counter aspects of what the elite are doing. For example, there's technology that's a part of Bitcoin now that can be used to uncensorably publish documents and distribute it to everyone with a Bitcoin node instantly and have it not be able to be erased. We could make that use that as a way to really cut out the social media censorship and make it so that important information gets out to people. And there's other things that, I'm focusing on Bitcoin, I guess, but outside of Bitcoin, there are things we can do, and there are technologies we can develop, and plenty of alternatives we can make, whether it's currency or something else. But it's time for people to focus on those alternatives and focus on developing those solutions. Why it's still much easier to communicate freely, because I think it's quite likely that as we go into the next few years, as we get closer to the year 2030, it's going to become harder to communicate online, and people need to rapidly think about what we're going to do to face this stuff, and a lot of it involves building alternative systems.
To change the subject slightly,
she's taking my ideas.
The way in which people, there seemed to be a coming together, a crystallizing of opposition to tyranny. In the immediate aftermath of COVID, people seemed to realize that there was something rotten in the state of Denmark. But then people started to sort of snap back into line, be it around Ukraine or whatever. And with that in mind, why do you think it is that everyone, let's say in the US presidential election sphere, takes the same stance always on Israel? There's always this lockstep. Israel is only right. Israel is always right. To what extent should we be aware of and worried about the AIPAC Israeli lobby influence, hegemony, really, over American politics?
Yeah, well, there's a lot.
Just before she unpacks this is a touchy subject. And this is one of those things that I've tried to navigate myself. Now, here's the thing. We have good and bad people in every culture, religion, faith, good and bad. But when it comes to the Jewish one, it is the only culture, religion, or faith we are not allowed to say anything bad about. In the instant you point the finger at a criminal that happens to be of that, well, then you're anti-Semitic, you're dangerous, you're all of those things. But are people willing to stand on that fear of criticizing one protected culture, religion, or faith to the point where we will allow ourselves to be led into World War III, which is a zero-win scenario for humanity? We have a nuclear war. Humanity is obliterated. Are we willing to be afraid to criticize people doing bad things just because they're a part of a protected class? This is a brave conversation these two are about to embark on.
To say there. And there's a lot of history there as well. So what I mentioned in the beginning about the National Crime Syndicate and the Jewish mob and the Italian mafia getting in bed very early with U.S. intelligence, keep in mind that Israel was created in 1948 when all of that stuff was happening. And the very same Jewish mobsters involved with that in the United States were also sending a lot of weapons to the Haganah, which later morphed into the IDF when Israel was created, and was sort of this paramilitary group that helped create Israel and Palestine. And, a lot of those connections persisted, and you had a lot of early CIA people be very influential in the rise of Israel's national security state. That's why you have like statues in Tel Aviv to CIA officials, early CIA officials like James Jesus Angleton, and things like that. And that's why in a lot of past CIA scandals, Iran-Contra being a good example, you have intimate CIA and Israeli involvement. You know, I would argue that that a lot of those intelligence, organized crime-linked factions, the United States work very closely in Israel because of that shared history. Ultimately, a lot of the same organized crime networks dominate both countries, and you know, AIPAC has become a major vessel for that. Again, going back to Leslie Wexner, who I've done a lot of work on. Most of AIPAC is populated with people that are former Wexner fellows. You know, he's been very focused on developing young global leaders since the 1980s, and actually directly interfaces, you know, with the World Economic Forum Young Global Leader Program, which is hosted at the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School, which Wexner expressly created along with Jeffrey Epstein. So, you know, there's been a lot of influence of these organized crime-linked billionaires on U.S. On U.S. politics, and they're also very influential in Israel as well. A great example is also the Bronfman family, who you know, dominated the early liquor industry after American prohibition ended. They're Canadian. They exploited a lot of loopholes. The reason they were able to get their liquor across the border during prohibition is because of their connections to organized crime, which persisted long after prohibition ended. And you know, for example, the Bronfmans are the people behind Justin Trudeau. Stephen Bronfman was his biggest, arguably the most influential figure in his rise. And you know, the Bronfmans are very influential in the U.S. as well. They've been tied to sex scandals like Nexium. Edgar Bronfman Sr. had a relationship allegedly with Jeffrey Epstein, and as it relates to finances, and that's why Epstein is said to have left Bear Stearns in the early 1980s. You know, there's a lot of these associations that unfortunately you have an oligarchy that has a lot of influence in the United States and also in Israel. And unfortunately, they conflate criticism of these people that are essentially the successors, oligarch successors to the Jewish mob, as, you know, representing all Jewish people. And if you criticize them, your friend is anti-Semitic. But it's actually, I would argue, anti-Semitic to conflate or organized crime-linked billionaires with all Jewish people. I mean, what?
So that's such a huge point. This to me is one of the biggest booms in this whole interview. Now, thanks to some of the, we now know that two Canadian oligarchs have massive control over what happens around the world through the Bronfmans and the Thompson. These two people, these two individuals have more sway, influence, and money than even the George Soroses do. That's the point I want people to get. In our friends down in America, this is, you know, I struggle speaking with American people. I love you guys so much. You're friends, family, allies. We end up in the same hell together. All of that. I understand it, but they don't hear what I'm trying to tell them. When I talk on a lot of American programs, they think that I'm complaining about Canada because I want America to come and save us. No, that isn't it at all, guys. We can handle ourselves here. What I'm trying to tell Americans is you're looking at the wrong swamp. The swamp that has got your backyard and is prepared to ambush you is in Canada. It's not Canadians, but the swamp creatures that have laid a trap for America are in Canada. So I don't want Americans to think that we want them to come and save us. We don't. What we want you to know is that we are trying to warn you. These guys are trying to take you out silently from behind through filling Canada with your mortal enemies. And you guys are so busy looking elsewhere that you think we're just complaining you want to save us. No. We want you to know that we're getting wiped out trying to cover your butts, and you still don't see the threat coming. That's a message I hope somebody clips and cuts out and sends to our American families. I hope it made sense.
And also, like, criticizing the Israeli state or criticizing Mossad is framed as anti-Semitic on occasion. But that's like saying, if you criticize the CIA, you're anti-American, or if you criticize MI5, you're anti-Brit. It doesn't make any sense on its face. And these people are using, what has been historically a targeted ethnicity as a shield for, crimes that they have committed. And that's why I think ultimately none of the real benefactors of the Epstein scandal are ever going to come to justice, and with the client lists and all of that stuff is never going to be made public. And it's because, we know so much about the Leslie Wexner-Epstein relationship, and literally nothing has been done to that man, and nothing will be done. And I think that's a testament to how influential these people have become, and their explicit efforts in dominating and manipulating specifically, the Jewish community, whether the U.S. and in Israel. Leslie Wexner is a man who bragged to New York Magazine about being demonically possessed. And then he went on to focus most of his quote unquote philanthropy on molding the minds of leaders of the Jewish American community specifically, and also in Israel. And, I think that's, can you imagine if that happened like on the Christian side, a Catholic billionaire that just brags about being demonically possessed going on to train Catholic priests and leaders of, Catholic communities around the world? I think it makes no sense. And unfortunately, the overuse of, anti-Semitism, which does exist, but the overuse of it is being used to protect people who need to be held accountable. And unfortunately, not necessarily saying that all of these people are of one ethnicity, but the fact that these people, these particular actors can be shielded from criticism, the global oligarchy uses them to advance agendas because you can be called a bigot for criticizing them. And I think that unfortunately,
that understanding must be applied to everything. They overuse the terms to the point where there is no meaning left in them, so you cannot distinguish between the good and the bad. You cannot distinguish the real Nazis from the fake Nazis because everybody's a Nazi, right? You can't separate the radical Islamists from Muslims because they're all radical Islamists, or we're all white supremacists just because they're white. So this is the same thing with anti-Semitism. You're not. It's lost all meaning when you cannot differentiate the good from the bad, which then means that you cannot protect the innocent. You cannot protect the people that are actually being you can't protect Jewish people from the people that are actually being anti-Semitic if you use it to broad brush everything. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. It's a big point. We need to apply that filter again, clear the lens on the discussion, and knowing what we're accusing people of doing and or not doing.
Fortunately needs to change. And I think in the US, there's a lot of efforts to compromise our politicians. I wrote an extensive book looking at the use of sex blackmail against American politicians. And again, this is something that the CIA and also Israeli intelligence and really intelligence agencies all over the world learned from the mob, because sex blackmail was something that the mob did back in the 20s and 30s and even before to expand their power and influence. And it's worked very effectively for intelligence agencies since then.
Sorry. I just have to address this. You guys are letting them in more through the south than you are through the north, but you're being lied to about that. I saw a report of more than 15,000 from the north going into the south, into America just last week. But here's the thing I want you to remember is they're not invading you in America yet. What I'm trying to tell you is they are building an army in Canada. And they are arming themselves. There is videos out there of these people importing boatloads and sea cans full of weapons. So that stuff America left all over in Afghanistan, like Christmas, That's all been loaded up into boats and sea cans, and it's now sitting in Canada. And these guys are getting fat and lazy, and Trudeau's government is paying them to be here, live here, and prepare their army. So it's not that you have to worry about hostile enemies walking into your country to sponge off of you. You guys have plenty of that, yes. But it's the army that's building in the shadows that you guys are not going to see coming that I'm afraid of. And when they take control of Canada, and you don't just have a Cuban communist problem, what are you guys going to do with the second largest land mass being controlled by radical Islam? That's what I'm trying to let folks know in America. No offense. I know you guys got lots walking through, more through the south than you do through the north, but that's the point. That's the point. They're not all coming yet. They're building up here. And our traders and infiltrators in office are making sure that they're well fed and looked after until they're called upon. And with the way things are kicking off in the Middle East, and even in the UK and in some places in Canada right now, I think we can expect them to be being called upon sooner rather than later is my concern.
But then what I also argue in the book is that in the era of, the technology, after the 2000s, I guess, and, the use of technology and personal electronic devices becoming ubiquitous, they don't really need to compromise us with sex blackmail. They have access to our communications. They can blackmail us with things that they access from our devices, or they can implant things in our devices that are incriminating, even if they're not even ours, and accuse us of things and things like that. And so, there's been efforts to blackmail us for a long time. And, one faction of that certainly is an outgrowth of the Jewish mob, but it's much broader than that. And again, I would encourage people to look at this union of organized crime and intelligence and realize that that's essentially what's running the world at this point. And we don't want these people, including people who would admitted, are proud of the fact that they think they're demonically possessed, to be guiding where our world is going and creating these systems that they want to onboard everyone onto. I mean, it's complete insanity. And again, going back to Silicon Valley, why did every single Silicon Valley oligarch have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? Why are more questions not asked about that? It's truly mind-boggling. The two Google co-founders were subpoenaed as part of the Jeffrey Epstein JP Morgan case in the Virgin Islands. So was Elon Musk. Peter Thiel had extensive meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn. And these are, some are Republican donors, some are Democrat donors. Why do all these powerful people have all these relationships with a guy that was a sex blackmailer? And I would also argue, a very accomplished financial criminal and currency speculator, which hasn't been a focus of Epstein reporting at all. But these people engage in brazen financial crime and have gotten away with it for a very long time as part of this extensive wealth transfer from us to them. And I'll stop there.
It is interesting that when Jeffrey Epstein's name sits right at the center of so many parts of the web. There's so many connections there. It's interesting that there clearly came a time when his use was no more. Yes. It's interesting that even at the heart, even people that are at the heart of these machinations, these Machiavellian figures, they can end up facing the exit door for all time.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I've argued before that Jeffrey Epstein was really middle management. The person he was mostly fronting for was Leslie Wexner, who's, again, never going to be held accountable for anything there. And I think, again, he a lot of the Epstein scandal, they want you to focus so much on the salacious aspect, the sex blackmail, the human trafficking aspect. And I don't necessarily want to downplay that either, because it's obviously horrendous and horrible. But I think there's been an effort to have the focus exclusively on that and not on the other things he did, which involve a lot of brazen financial crime that has resulted and helped facilitate this massive wealth transfer for us to them. And I think, some of my reporting on, like when the JP Morgan Epstein case came out, I wrote a piece on Jamie Dimon, and it turns out his rise to power to become head of JP Morgan was intimately influenced by Leslie Wexner himself, and people that are intimately tied up with this group of, organized crime-linked billionaires that call themselves the mega group that includes the Bronfmans and Wexner. They co-founded it, and a handful of other billionaires that are responsible for Donald Trump and Barack Obama for their political careers and all of this. I mean, this is something that truly influences both parties. And that's why I think in the United States, unfortunately, so many politicians are completely beholden to Israel and very willing to overlook, the war crimes that Israel commits. And also, the fact that Israel has been a very aggressive nation against the United States when it comes to espionage. Actually, from the Edward Snowden documents, there was one that ranked the most aggressive, espionage countries engaging in aggressive espionage against the United States, and Israel was number 3 after Russia and China. Why is that? And documented instances of them stealing, important military technology. I wrote a lot about that as it related to Epstein's visits to the Clinton White House in the 1990s, efforts to directly send sensitive American military technology to China through Israel, and all of this. And I would argue that a big part of this, goes back to something that was actually charted out by Samuel Pisar, who was a very close friend of Robert Maxwell back in the early 70s. He testified before Congress that what was going on in the early 70s was what he called the rise of the trans-ideological corporation, where essentially he said Western capital and Eastern capital, so the state-owned companies of then communist Russia and China, were merging with Western capital, and that they were building a system that was making the nation state irrelevant. And he told this to Congress in the 1970s. A congressman asked him if this was a bad thing, and he was like, not necessarily, And this is someone who was very much in bed with both the KGB and the CIA, and also Israeli intelligence, and was, one of the closest figures to Robert Maxwell, who helped affect a lot of those things as it relates to technology transfer and other things, why he was alive. And his children, the twins, Christine and Isabel, as well as Ghislaine and Kevin and Ian, intimately involved in all that after his death. And this is something that, of course, goes well beyond Pisar and just the Maxwells. I think that's ultimately what has been happening. And you essentially have this, I think that helps explain why you have so many of these billionaires in the US, including ones that back, someone that frames himself as a China hawk like Trump, people like Larry Fink and Steven Schwartzman, big backers of Trump, so intimately tied up with China, for example. There's a lot of these connections of transnational capital. Not enough people follow the money and focus on this rhetoric. They want us focused on it, sort of the more superficial geopolitical level. But ultimately, these people are all enacting biometric digital ID, programmable surveillable money, whether it's CBDCs or a private sector equivalent, and are all, on board with the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030, which, if you're familiar with who wrote them and who developed Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, it's people like Mike Bloomberg, a billionaire, and Mark Carney, Goldman Sachs career central banker, also probably a billionaire. It's.
Did you guys catch that? That was one of the other big booms that I wanted you to get. Mark Carney was working with, what's his name? Jason Kenney, for Stephen Harper. And they wrote that shit on behest of these closeted oligarchs in Canada. That's where so much of the heart of the evil of the swamp lives. Canada is their cottage country.
It's banker designed. It's a way for, just complete control of the populace, complete financial surveillance, complete surveillance of everything you do. And with the goal, if you listen to people like Yuval Noah Harari, of putting that surveillance inside your body. It's complete madness. And, I would really hope that people. Oh, sorry.
No. Just what you're saying there, just towards the end there. It's so anti-human. Anti-human is a description that many people use. The blatant rise or return of a kind of a eugenicist, neo-Malthusian you know, anti-population agenda is so clear. You know, that if 2030, if Agenda 2030 is enacted, it will in all likelihood be the premeditated murder of half the population of the planet. And yet it's being pushed in this cold-blooded, premeditated way. That I do wonder at the extent to which we have unconsciously, inadvertently created an ecosystem on planet Earth in which thrives and rises to the top a parasitic, psychopathic class that, apart from money and power, is motivated by just, I don't know, some kind of fear of fellow humankind and a shared conviction that they would do better if they had to look at many, many fewer of us.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. But I think that, you know, this eugenics ideology that you point out is making a comeback has its antecedents in a lot of these groups in elite Britain in the early 20th century and also late 19th century and also in the United States, and they sort of came together. But a lot of influential people were members of those. So, for example, you know, the science fiction author H.G. Wells was one of these prominent eugenicists of that era, and he wrote and stated things like, you know, eventually when this eugenic stuff comes to fruition, the human species is going to split, and you're going to have the elite who are intelligent, tall, and attractive, and then the lower class is going to be these squat-like goblins who are intellectually stunted and cognitively incapable of doing what they can do now, and they eat bugs. What do you know? And it seems like they've been sort of leading us on this path, and I don't think it's so much that they're anti-human. They're well, it is anti-human in the sense that they're not anti-human in the sense about when it's applied to themselves and other elites, but people that aren't part of their club, they view as, you know, worse than dirt. And so the idea is to sort of shape people to become what their twisted vision of the lower classes is, to actually become that, like, physically and mentally and emotionally. And we're being manipulated into that, unfortunately. And so this explosion of, efforts to sort of, genetically manipulate us and mentally manipulate us with AI, which is reaching unprecedented levels. And Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt say on their book on AI that the end result of AI is going to be the people that are dependent on it for algorithms are going to become cognitively diminished to the point that they can't live without AI. And there will be a splitting of the species, just like H.G. Wells says, into the people who are capable of understanding AI and the people who are not capable. And the people who are capable of understanding it are the people that program and develop AI, or who sustain the people that program and maintain it. And then the other lower class, the people that the AI acts upon, who are becoming cognitively diminished and will be unable to understand what AI is doing to them and what is happening to them at all. And it's frankly very disturbing. And a lot of these groups, these eugenics groups, never really went away. The earliest days of the World Economic Forum intimately tied up with the Club of Rome, which is an outgrowth of this other group called Adela, that was basically trying to take over the entire economic landscape of Latin America. All of these Western oligarchs trying to basically kingmake the oligarchy of Latin America during the mid-20th century, which they did quite successfully. And then they went on to create the Club of Rome. And one of the authors of the flagship paper of the Club of Rome, which was featured very prominently at the early WEF meetings, The Limits to Growth, one of the co-authors of that, a man named Dennis Meadows, is on video saying that if we can't reduce the world population to under 1 billion people, we must impose a scientific dictatorship that controls 8 billion people. So we either depopulate and you have freedom, or we keep population at the same level, but we impose a scientific dictatorship. I mean, they're very overt about it. And a lot of these groups continue on and are intimately involved in the sustainable.
I think, aren't we almost there? Aren't they close to mission accomplished? But guys, I have faith in humanity. It's always darkest before the dawn. We couldn't clean it up if we couldn't see it. So thanks for hanging out and being a part of the change.
Development agenda, groups like the Global Footprint Network, which shares an insane amount of board member overlap with the Club of Rome. And as I wrote in a recent piece with my colleague Mark Goodwin, who I mentioned earlier, are attempting to impose a carbon market on Latin America right now, built on the Bitcoin blockchain. And they've essentially they're focusing on the local level, the municipal level, not the national government level, getting mayors across the continent to sign over their protected areas to this group, who are going to turn these protected areas into carbon credits, and then have it be traded by all these entities that don't necessarily have these groups' interests at heart, and are tied up with the Club of Rome, which is part of this group that, in the 70s, along with Henry Kissinger, framed the population growth of Latin America as a national security threat to Western nations. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. But unfortunately, a lot of the talking points around sustainable development are framed as altruistic. And I think the reason these groups have been so successful is that they frame themselves as philanthropists and altruists, when really they are not. And they do not have our best interests at heart. And so many people are good people, but we have been too trusting, and we are being manipulated now to trust the same people that have been doing this to human society for over 100 years. And if we keep trusting them instead of ourselves and the people we know who are good people in local communities, we are in trouble. We need to stop trusting these people that are being pushed to us and we're being told are our saviors and altruists and all of this. Look at their connections and follow the money, and you will find that is not what these people are, and that is not what these people want. And unfortunately, as far as the transhumanist agenda goes, I mean, that's an effort, I would argue that's because a lot of the people pushing that have really no spirituality at all, and are, as far as the spectrum on material and spiritual, as far to the material side as you can get. And they think they can become gods if they advance this technology enough. But they also, again, have this mentality that they will be gods and the rest of us will be serfs, and it will be the class difference won't be enforced by economics like it once was maybe in the medieval era. It will be enforced by the technology that they've designed to control and that they're making us dependent on. And the more dependent we become on it, and the less we do, and the more we're enslaved by the convenience of it and all of that, the closer we will edge to this world they are building. So it's high time to get less dependent. I'm not saying get off of it entirely if you can't for work or whatever, but it's time to think of alternatives and just even mentally disconnect a little bit,
She hits on so many points there with that. And remember what in Davos this year, January, all these global freak shows gathered together, and all of the crises of the world was put on the back burner. That's not the priority anymore. The priority was combating disinformation, misinformation, us, aka all of us, and rebuilding trust. Those are the top two priorities of all of these global slugs right now. Remember all that? This is becoming clear as crystal, I think. And yeah.
There's things everyone can do.
The cloaking device that is philanthropy is fascinating. And John D. Rockefeller, you mentioned it earlier on, when they took when the Anti-Monopolies Commission took his oil company away from him, his baby away from him, and he reacted in all sorts of ways, pushing for the Fed, and then but reinvented himself as a philanthropist,
yes,
as a cloak. And then you see it manifest obviously in the likes of Gates, who has made more money, he has inflated his personal wealth more since he came out as a philanthropist than any other point previously. And I do wonder at the extent to which Gates, simply by dint of his personality, and simply by dint of his seeming sort of absence of self-awareness, is just further ahead of the pack in exposing himself as a neo-eugenicist and a neo-Malthusian. He seems blatantly to be declaring his desire for fewer fellow human beings on the planet, and yet still he wears the clothes of and masquerades as a philanthropist. It's an astonishing sleight of hand.
It is. And, a lot of it is around the very politicized narrative around vaccines. And so, a lot of his philanthropy has been focused on vaccines. But if you look at the philanthropic organizations he's created in that sphere, groups like Gavi, they say on their website, not that their goal is to help improve public health globally, it's to improve globally the health of vaccine markets, in which Gates himself is heavily invested in a number of vaccine companies. And he said, before COVID, but like at a World Economic Forum annual meeting, he was interviewed by someone and said it's the best return on investment he could have possibly imagined. This isn't philanthropy at all. And I mean, they've tried and gotten away with it by calling some of this philanthropy impact investing. We're investing for impact, but really they're investing in dominating the infrastructure that they're trying to herd us onto to control all of our lives in this new, digital ID centric era. And it's not about helping people at all. And the fact that so many people continually fall for these altruistic masks is very troubling. And someone like Bill Gates too, I mean, you look back, his father used to run Planned Parenthood, which was, sort of the brainchild of someone like Margaret Sanger, who was a member of the American Eugenics Society, and very vocal about the fact that her efforts in that sphere were to reduce the population of African Americans in the United States. And then you have stuff going on like in the COVID era, where the people that were developing and running the US vaccination program, Operation Warp Speed, wanted to give it all to minorities first. And we're framing that as altruistic. These are lesser served communities. We need to be more inclusive and give them the experimental gene therapy first. That hasn't been, even though before COVID, Moderna's, for example, couldn't even pass animal trials because its mRNA platform was so unsafe and could only be injected into people because of emergency use protocols where all of that testing was conveniently suspended. And then they're going to test it on minorities and frame it as inclusivity and equality and all of this stuff. I mean, we just are suckers for these talking points, and we need to stop and realize that these institutions have been corrupted and they don't have our best interests at heart. But who has our best interests at heart? Our families, our communities, our neighbors. That is what we need to focus on, not so much on these people that are being pushed out as either frontmen for the oligarchs or the oligarchs themselves. Again, going back to someone like Elon Musk, his grandfather helped run the technocracy movement, which is this very scientific dictatorship that the Club of Rome people foretold, and people like Patrick Wood have been warning about for so long. Like the Trilateral Commission, which was Rockefeller created, is one of the groups that has been pushing for this so long. And Keir Starmer is a member of that, right? I mean, these people are still everywhere. These agendas continue through these organizations. And I mean, they're crazy eugenicists that don't give a damn about regular people. So regular people have to give a damn about themselves and stop looking for these people to save them, because they're herding us into this vision that, H.G. Wells and people like Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger have shared, of this idea of there's going to be an upper class and a lower class. They're going to become different species, and us, the lower class, are going to become basically mentally retarded and eat bugs and become goblins that serve these like super elite that are enhanced genetically and all of this stuff. I mean, it's madness. And we have to keep in mind a lot of the stuff that's being framed as either mental enhancement, like the brain machine interface, or genetic enhancement. All of those things are dual use. You can enhance and you can diminish with all of those technologies, and almost all of those technologies
Case in point,
have been heavily developed by groups like DARPA in the Pentagon in the United States and other militaries around the world, specifically for that reason, because not only are they enhancers, they can be used as weapons of war against people, targeting them on the genetic level and all of this. So we are literally, living in a society where maniacs are in the driver's seat. And we need to get out of the car immediately.
I look at some of these.
I love that analogy.
Bill Gates. And you look at me and you think, if you look at yourself in the mirror, Bill, you'd have to wonder if you really are the avatar of the super race. You don't look like you're carrying the ultimate genetic inheritance that really ought to be spread around the world. And it's so true of others of them. They hardly look like ideals, and yet at the same time, as you allude to there, I'm very aware of my kids, my sons, and their contemporaries are actually focusing on things like, and they're aware of, real nutrition. They're paying attention to the things that they put into their bodies, food and drink. They go to the gym, they lift weights because they want to be strong and they want to maximize their physical potential. they look askance at what my kids describe as the nonsense. I mean, they watch things online, but they seem so attuned to the fact that so much of it is manipulative nonsense. And I do take great solace from the or some of the generation coming through is alive to this. They've seen this, and we live in this kind of existential fear of the Bill Gateses and the George Soroses and the and the Peter Thiels and the rest of these technocrats, oligarchs, billionaires, however you want to describe them. But they've already got their number, and I think you're right. And there are no heroes coming. There's no cavalry coming to rescue us, and nor should there be. That's a zero-sum game. But I do think increasingly it's demonstrable that more and more people out there, especially younger people, but not exclusively, are aware that they have to take the responsibility for themselves that you're talking about.
Yes, I think so too. And I think it's important to keep in mind that social media is becoming increasingly controlled. And so for those kind of success stories and seeing those examples of people who are increasingly like that and how many of us there are, you're not going to see that reflected on social media. Social media is very manipulated based on your online activity, what they want you to see and how they want to manipulate you emotionally specifically. That's why Facebook got caught years ago manipulating people's news feeds to make them more depressed and more miserable. They can do that to people, and people that they know see through the bullshit. They want them to feel demoralized, and they do this stuff.
That's why I left that industry. 100%. The number one reason, the biggest reason, was when I realized that we were weaponizing social media against people through advertising and marketing and sales. At that point, I realized I was a part of the system, the enemy, a part of the destruction and the division. So that was when I fired all of my clients and went on a convoy.
All the time, and there's a lot of examples of them doing that. Polling, for example, saying that people, 70%, 80% of people hold this viewpoint. They probably don't, but they want you to think the majority do, and they want you to feel alone. And there are a lot more of us than there are of them, and there are a lot of people that know that all of this stuff is bullshit, honestly, and want to do something else, and that all of this technological connectivity is not the answer to happiness and to health, and having like wearables and implants and all of this stuff isn't going to make you healthier. And all of, we need to sort of go back to some of the more traditional ways of things, be more self-sufficient, grow our own food, get rid of the GMOs and all of that stuff. I mean, there's so many examples and there's so much we can do, but what really matters is that, specifically the younger generation, we have to lead by example for them. And we also have to teach them skills that are being lost as people become more and more dependent on technology for our livelihood. If we don't teach the younger generation how to grow food, they may forget. And if it's censored off of the internet, maybe they'll never know unless they're lucky enough to come across a physical copy of a gardening book or something like that. We have to preserve this knowledge. What's interesting too is someone who grew up in the West and who now lives in South America. I feel like there's sort of a generational gap in that loss of knowledge of traditional skills. Where I grew up in the United States, no American I knew, except for much older people like my grandma's age and older, knew how to knit, knew how to sew, knew how to make shoes or any other number of things. No one really grew their own food. My grandparents, my grandma worked, back in the 50s and whatnot, and, TV dinners and all of that, they didn't make food, and neither did my mom and whatever. All of that knowledge can be lost, whether it's, home ec skills or really anything else about producing what you need, whether it's, fixing a car or fixing plumbing or, any of that kind of stuff. If we want to be self-resilient, we have to build a knowledge base, and we have to give that knowledge to the younger generation, because that is how human society has survived. And if we don't want to go back to the literal Stone Age, we have to take care of the younger people and not just, say, okay, watch TV and give them a smartphone because I don't want to spend time with you because I'm sucked into my device too. I mean, that's what so much of parenting, unfortunately, has become. I see it in the US when I go back to visit. I see it where I live in Chile. I mean, it's very unfortunate. We need to lead by example as much as we can, because a lot of younger people, as you point out, are figuring it out, and they're tired of being bathed in all this digital stuff all the time, and they're looking for analogs. Like there's a resurgence of young people being interested in like vinyl records and stuff, something they can physically touch and own, and we need to encourage that and bring a lot of that stuff back. As much as possible.
There's so much to be encouraged by. I mean, within my own four walls, my son collects vinyl LPs and has a record player. My daughter has a film camera and shoots on film. And they found their way to both of those media by themselves. We weren't trying to push it at them. That's been a natural progression. I live in Stirling, which is a medium-sized town in Scotland. I talk to all sorts of people all the time, across the demographic. I don't know anybody who wants lab-grown meat. I don't know anyone that speaks up in favour of milk that's derived from maggots, who wants to eat insects, who favours CBDCs over other means of exchange. I don't know anybody who wants to live in a 15-minute city or who wants a digital ID. So although these things are being dangled over us, sort of Damocles style, there is no popular support from them, even amongst those that some of us might describe as being asleep or not awake.
Sure.
There's no public uptake of it, and I think you're right. And the fundamental cause of optimism is that the people I talk to increasingly know that what we're being fed is a diet of bullshit, and we're being led up the garden path by people who do not have our best interests at heart, all the way up to and including World War III. People can see it, and that's the sources of optimism are in that awareness, without a doubt.
Absolutely. But again, I think, they're going to manipulate the online public squares as much as possible to make you think that's not the case. And that's why it's so important to build a real physical public square with the people you talk to in your town and in your city and in your community, and say, what are we going to do about this? How are we want to get off our knees to these people who are trying to enslave us. How do we do it? It's time to move to that phase of everything. I think enough people are aware of what's going on and that they don't want this. So how do we build a better future? And that has to be done locally, and it has to be done as much as possible in an analog way. Talking to real people, making real human connections. That's the only way we can beat this anti-human future that we're being led into. And again, talking about how your children are into vinyl records and film. I mean, the kind of stuff.
I got to pause them there, because this is so critical. There was a comment back. I just got to go back just a little bit here and find this, but it's important. Bear with me for a second here, guys, because there's too many people that scare me. This one here. Okay, David W. Carlson says, so if the globalist wants to destroy us, don't we have the right to destroy our enemies? The Art of War. Thanks, Sun Tzu. I agree. But how we do that, I think that I would find a lot of people that would disagree with me on how we do that. And I am 100% in Whitney's camp on this. The only 100% safe and effective cure for globalism is localism. Trying to engage in a conflict, a static conflict with the globalists, we will lose hands down 100% of the time. Every single time. We cannot win what people think of as war if it's taken in that context. Buckminster Fuller. You cannot defeat or something from fighting within it. You build something new and make it irrelevant, right? That's how we beat these guys. 100%. Localism is the 100% safe and effective cure for this globalism. And that localism extends to what I talk about, constitutional conventions and seating a de jure government. That's, looking after locally, Canada first.
That the human soul gravitates toward. I mean, we're here to create, and that's what we do. And so instead of like going into the metaverse and being fed an ever-ending diet of AI generated slop, let's get out there and like create something new, whether it's art or it's music or it's an alternative financial
100%.
system. It doesn't matter, but everyone has skills. everyone has different interests and abilities, and we should come together and build something different. I mean, it's time that we do it. And we're so many of us have been, especially during COVID, have become accustomed to being so online and just having our whole lives be on there and so connected that we really need to disconnect and remember what it's like to be human and create with other humans. And if we don't do that, yeah, we're in deep trouble. But I think, again, I have hope that the younger generation realizes how much of a soulless existence this is and are looking for something real. And we need to join with them and we need to support that. And again, it's at the local level, it's at the community level. All these people that are going to be put out, on the national stage for president or prime minister or whatever, are controlled and are not going to promote these kind of solutions. They're going to try and stop them, but they can't stop them when enough people at the local level say, we've had enough and we are not going to be on our knees anymore while you're destroying our country and destroying our towns and destroying our world and our environment. Enough is enough. I mean, the same people who claim to be altruistic and want to help the world for public health, but have been stealing our wealth and making us sicker, are claiming that they care about the environment. They want to save the planet, but they're the ones destroying it. This whole world that we're being pushed into requires so much mining, that they want to dig up essentially all of the Andes in Latin America and major swaths of Africa and make them uninhabitable so they can get all the nickel and cobalt and copper to build their electric vehicles and their AI data centers and all of this stuff. AI data centers and all of that also need a ton of water, as do the mines, and they're trying to privatize all of that stuff right now. That's what carbon markets are. It's privatizing carbon-based life, essentially, and they want to do the same with water and air. And the person that came up with carbon credits used to work for the junk bond scandal-ridden bank, Drexel Burnham Lambert, and he invented financial derivatives, which exploded in 2008 and largely caused the 2008 economic crisis. I mean, again, these are like criminal banker schemes, and they're framing it as they're saving the global commons and saving the planet and saving humanity. They're doing the opposite. We need to be the ones that save the planet and save humanity, and we absolutely can do that. We just have to remember who we are, what humans are meant to do, which is create and lift each other up. And we need to get rid of these people who are keeping us down and destroying our world.
Whitney Webb, you are an inspiration.
Okay, that's the basically the end of that. And so there's some great comments here that I just want to scroll back here a little bit and go through. There's so much that we need to take to heart in this, and that point of I'm absolutely loving seeing you guys organizing gets-togethers in real life in the chat. That's the ultimate goal of this is we have a community here online at What's Up Canada. I never intended to build an audience. I always meant to build a community. I encourage this community concept. This is only a medium of communication to keep you guys informed. I traveled around the country telling people time and time again, find something to do to bring the community together offline during the COVID. Go clean up something in the neighborhood. Go build something for somebody. Find these excuses to get together and get your hands dirty, bump elbows with each other, and talk heart to heart. The protests and the rallies and all of those things, they serve a purpose, but that's not where you build community on. That's where you go for 2 minutes of hate and vent. We need to build community and reestablish that. And what that will remind you of is that feeling of depression, isolation, and loneliness and despair that you get when you're online isn't real. It's not real, folks. It's not. We outnumber them by so far astronomical. That's why they need us to feel this way, isolated, demoralized, and alone, and hopeless and helpless. You'll never have energy to get up and do anything if that's how you feel. And that's the point and purpose of all of social media, manipulation of these Silicon Valley platforms, is to keep you parked, keep you feeling that way, keep you parked, and keep us squabbling and fighting. And we absolutely, so I wanted to get to a couple of comments here. This is a great one. People just don't know. They just don't understand so many different things. Parallel markets, 100%. These are the things, this is why I have the Patriot Switch as partners, guys, because now I don't have to be dependent on any of those places where they can exclude me or from getting what I need or I want. They can't keep me away from any of that stuff, right? Uh, Localism, even on local, I live the well, we just have to keep looking. We have to keep meeting, have to keep talking. This was the one I wanted to get to. All of our mayors, C40.org, have a meeting in September in Switzerland to get to the next step. This is something that I've been chirping about, C40.org. There's 350.org. There's the Federation of Strong Mayors. There's the ICLEI program. These are the legs of the beast. And, people like Maggie Hope Braun are having great effect, going after one of the legs of this beast, but there's others. And these things are blueprints. All of these things that we're experiencing, America's experiencing the same thing, UK, all of these countries experiencing the exact same thing, the same sensation of being defeated, beat up, beat down. It's all being manufactured, and we outnumber them so astronomically. The last election, pseudo election, placement of Trudeau, he won with 29% of the vote. That meant that 71% of Canadians couldn't get off the couch to do something different. This is the part that we have to get better at. And we do that by inspiring and invigorating each other, by going and get messy with some of our neighbors and build something, create something, take part in creating something. Right? So really huge stuff. If you don't have skills, go find somebody that does have skills. And this is what we're starting to do with the Tactical Civics group, is looking at where do people have skill sets and where can we help each other with fulfilling some of those things, those information gaps, things people don't know where to do, what to find, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, near one of the longest shows we've done here in a very long time. Impromptu. I know that was a drink from a fire hose, a lot for people to digest, but I think that there was a lot of tools in there for everybody as well. Maybe something I want to put out there. If somebody is interested in being a moderator on some of these discussions, shoot me an email. I could use a little help. We didn't have too many trolls tonight, but a little bit of help when we just do discover them would be awesome. And I guess we'll get to the B choice on Tuesday. Monday, we've got a great guest. Tomorrow is Bankers, Bandit, Bullion, and Bucks. Great comment, Karen. You are not alone. You have friends right here. And it isn't just people online. If you reach out and talk, you'll connect with them. There's people connecting all of the time within this community from all over the place. You just have to have the willingness, and that can happen. And if you guys want to put something together in Central South Ontario, I might actually even be able to make it myself. All right, guys. So much covered tonight. Such an interesting show. Loved watching all of you guys' comments and communicating in the chat and living, finding life, seeking life outside of the Ready Player One avatar universe. I absolutely love it. So, all right, guys, the end of the show. If you've got an important story, a whistleblower, information, evidence, any of those kinds of things, want to reach out to me to connect with other things. If you want to get plugged into the Tactical Civics group, we got lots going on all of the time. That is the best way to reach me. Contact at whatsupcanada.org. Don't forget to get plugged in on one of the alternative authentic media platforms that we have built and are developing for everybody to develop community elsewhere. Don't forget to get all of the bonuses and perks. You can get them free on What's Up Canada at Substack. and support your local trusted or your trusted journalist and media platform, whoever they might be. If they're doing the best work and you trust them the most, it's probably because they're not doing it for a business. They are not a part of the Freedom Industrial Complex. So I encourage those people to have the dedicated support of community as well. We're going to be bringing a lot more of that community together. It's something that Sean Newman, our guest last night, is very passionate about as well. So if you can help an independent journalist, and if this is the independent journalist that you want to help, this is the best way to do that, where Wayne gets to take full 100% of what you donate to put it back into what we are doing. That is the guy or the way to do that. Best, simplest, and easiest. And what else? I think I got one more I got to run by here. And if you want to buy me a coffee as an alternative, that is a very simple way to do that. And I think you can find all of that information on the Substacks as well. All right, guys, I love you guys from the bottom of my heart. Always have, always will. We're in this together, not just in the avatar space, but in the real world too. So on that note, those sponsored partners that I was talking about at Patriot Switch, take the time to read. I know everybody loves the jingle at the end of this, but read it as well. Take it to heart, because this is real people doing something, building that alternative, infrastructure. We're going to need this. And with if they come even close with the mandates and lockdowns and issues in travel, freedom of movement, this is going to, you'll be glad that you've got this in the bank, so you don't have to deal with any of that crap. So say hello to my partners, and we will see you tomorrow with Bryce. Love y'all. Stay mighty, my fellow patriots and hostages.